Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Art History Fun with Dr. Brian. I'm Brian Zygmunt, Professor of Art History at Mount St. Mary's University in Maryland. And I've got a request from the amazing Mickey Lyons, a former colleague at Louisiana Tech University, who asked for some information on John Singleton Copley's 18th century banger, Watson and the Shark. Well, as an Americanist, Mickey, hold my brandy old-fashioned, it's Copley time. Now, in order to understand this fantastic painting, we must first talk a little bit about both the painter who made it and the sitter who commissioned it. Copley was born in Boston around 1738. He was largely self-taught. His birth father died when he was a very young infant, and Copley's mother remarried a man named Peter Pelham, who was a British-trained engraver. So most of Copley's early training came through his examination of the prints in Peter Pelham's collection. Very quickly, Copley gained a reputation as a portraitist both in Boston, and that reputation began to spread outside of the New England area as well. For example, in 1770, Copley spent considerable time in New York painting wealthy merchants, lawyers, and actually military officers. During Copley's American colonial career, he became very well known for his ability to paint psychological insight of the sitters, his ability to render fabrics, both velvet, satins, furs, and his close attention to realism of things like tables, pewter coffee cups, and even at times little flying squirrels. Now, Copley left Boston in 1774 and sailed for London. Once he got to London, he met up with Benjamin West, who had been encouraging him to travel to the Old World, and Copley then took a grand tour. On that grand tour, he fell in love with the art of the classics and also of the Renaissance Old Masters, people like Raphael in particular. Now, one of Copley's most prominent patrons during his early time in London was that of Brooke Watson. Brooke Watson was a self-made English merchant and politician who was born in 1735. As a young man, Watson was orphaned. In many ways, there might be an analogy with Copley here, who, although not necessarily orphaned, certainly lived without his birth father. And as a young man in 1749, Watson set off to sea while he worked on a trading vessel docked outside of the harbor in Havana. One day, 14-year-old Brooke Watson decided to take a dip in the Caribbean, and that's when Brooke Watson lost his right foot. You can see this in the painting here, but despite not having a foot, Watson made good for himself. He eventually was elected a member of Parliament, was eventually elected Lord Mayor of London, and needless to say, towards the end of his life, Watson had acquired such wealth that he was able to commission this work from Copley. And it is on the day that Brooke Watson decided to take a dip in the Caribbean that Copley gives us our scene. Brooke Watson is clearly identifiable. He's the fair-haired young man in the drink about to be consumed by a gigantic shark. You can see the shark's head in the lower right part of the composition. And if you look to the right edge of it, you can see the tail of the shark, which suggests this is no small fish. This thing is enormous. And when we look at Brooke Watson, who's swimming in the nude for good reasons, I'll make that clear in a second, you can see that his right arm has been raised up and trying to grab the rope. And if you look at his right leg, you can see that part of it's not there. This means that the shark has already come around for chomp 1, and it looks like chomp 2 is going to end the poor young man's life. In the left part of the boat, you can see we have two men who are leaning forward to try to pull Brooke from the water. This detail is taken from Raphael and a painting of his that Copley might have seen called The Miraculous Draught of Fishes. The standing figure in the boat with the harpoon is likewise taken from a Raphael painting of St. George slaying the dragon. There's also a standing African man in the boat, and if there's going to be hope for Brooke, it's going to be this guy. He's the gentleman who's holding the rope. Now, when we look at this painting, we find it hard to believe that Brooks would live through this. He's already missing a foot, and Jaws is coming back around for another bite. But we know that Brooke Watson lives, because otherwise it'd be really hard for him to commission this portrait in 1778. But in many ways, what Copley is making a painting of is that of salvation, be it divine or otherwise. And because this work was given to an orphanage, it had a kind of moral message to it. Now, history paintings during the end of the 18th century often had moral messages. It's what the painting was designed to do. But when we look at those history paintings, they were often from the classical past or from the Bible. It's why they're called history paintings. It was relatively unique towards the end of the 18th century for a history painting to have such a contemporary scene. Certainly Benjamin West did this with the slightly earlier death of General Wolfe. But what Copley is doing here is building upon this tradition that history paintings don't have to be so historical. This is a scene from just a couple of decades before, and you can imagine the moral message. This painting going into an orphanage and Brooke Watson sort of whispering something to the wards of that facility. Hey, friend, I was an orphan too. And as a matter of fact, when I was a little bit older than you, a shark ate my foot. But I became a prominent business person. I was elected to Parliament, and I served as Lord Mayor of London. So pick yourself up by your bootstraps, young man. You can make good in this world as well. Now, Copley is very keen to give us a unique scene. You can see boats in the harbor and the buildings in the back of Havana. And one of the things that Copley did was both look at diagrams for what Havana Harbor would have looked like. He put particular attention into the masts of the ships. And, for us now in the 21st century, we all have a very keen idea of what a shark looks like. Thank you, Steven Spielberg. But for people living in England during the end of the 18th century, this was a completely new, exciting, and novel composition. People hadn't seen sharks, likely. And so this was Copley's way of providing that scene for an 18th century British audience. And so to end with the question that I promised I would answer, why is Brooke Watson nude? Well, it will come as no surprise, but sailors wore wool. Wool's very heavy when wet. It also stays warm when it's wet, but it's not the best swimming garment around. And so most people, when they swam wearing nothing. Brooke Watson is not unusual. He's just about to get eaten by a shark. In closing, let me thank Mickey again for the inspired request. A nice job, Mickey. For everyone else, thanks for sticking around. And if you happen to like this kind of content, I strongly urge you to go search out Smart History. It's a peer-reviewed online art history textbook with videos and essays written and performed by people kind of like me. It's a really marvelous resource. Shout out to Beth and Steven, who have been keeping me occupied for a really long time with all of that. Appreciate you sticking around. See you next time.